I'm working on take 2. This was take 1. It didn't feel even close to being 20 minutes. Oh no, I'm gonna have to get some stuff. Start over again. I am now going to be doing take 2 because I didn't have even close to the amount of time that was requested, which was 20 minutes. So we're going to start over and we're going to add a few more specifics into our design. While I'm cleaning this off, I know this is important for Nicholas, that he's testing out live permaculture design course. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Even though I want to go fishing now, I'm going to go ahead and do this over again. Try to get to that 20 minutes. Now I know some permaculture design teachers are like artists, and man, when they put drawings on the board, it's just delicious. How they represent all of the ideas. So I'm telling you right off the bat, this is the only second one I ever done. I'm only doing it because it was requested. This is for Nicholas Bertner in the School of Permaculture. I participated in a test live permaculture design course over the internet, and I must say I was rather impressed with how he adapted to all the issues that he had to deal with, like microphones and audio, and he got it down pretty good. I'd say it's close to being perfected. Hopefully he kicks that off and gets a lot of people participating in the course. Permaculture is a designing system, and a couple of main points that permaculture makes is it's a system, a designing system based on science that benefits both the environment and humans, which is very much a part or a different system than what's operating now, which is for humans only. Everything is for the benefit of humans, and we're going to have to change that pretty soon, because if we don't, the biological system is going to do it. It looks like I bring this up just a teeny bit. Now either my face is going to be dark or the board is going to be too light, so this is what I'm going to have to do. This is the lighting that I'm going to deal with. And I'm not that important. This design is what I have to take care of. So this is my original doodling. This is the genesis of the design that I'm going to produce today. Alright. And I must say quickly that I've also participated in another permaculture design course. The teacher's name was Jeff Lawton. It was an internet course. And if I have to compare the two, I'm going to say that Jeff Lawton course was more detailed concerning permaculture, a designer's manual. And that's what the permaculture design course is modeled after. Bill Mollison produced this course to help people understand biological aspects of the planet. There are sciences involved that are taught, and it's the mixing of these sciences that have the greatest impact on design in the permaculture scenario. So I'm calling this design here. So I like the Jeff Lawton one a lot. I also like the Nicholas Bertner School of Permaculture one that I'm participating in right now, that I'm doing this design for to finish up to conclude my participation in the course. I will say that Nicholas did bring in some maybe new discoveries, new information on the sciences. He was a little more detailed in the soil sciences than Jeff Lawton was, but Jeff Lawton spent more time on, the generalization of the manual, so that we could get the idea of the manual. And then we, the participants, at least those who were interested and got the idea from his course, then began to read the manual. Of course, then once you read the manual a couple times, you've got that pretty much set up in your mind, and you begin to go off on these other issues, other sciences, and read them more in depth, which is what Nicholas was teaching there in the soil part of it, and a couple of the other parts of it as well. So this is the design I'm calling Village on the Knob. Now we're going to have a perfect knob. It's going to be very hard to find a perfect knob, but I'm going to draw a perfect knob and I'm going to design a perfect knob because this is just a main frame design. So we're going to have kind of a slight rise in the landscape, a knob, and it's going to come back down. That's our knob. Knob in the landscape. Oh yeah, knob in the landscape. Design. Okay, at the very top we're going to have we'll do that. I don't have any bright colors. Everything's dried out. I don't even have blue for water, so I got 3 colors to deal with: black, purple, and green, and that's what we're dealing with. So we'll use purple as the walls of the center building. The center building is going to be the community building. Nobody's going to live there or sleep there, but everybody's going to get together on very important aspects of their lives. You know, like just meetings, food storage, tool storage. I think tool storage is very important. Everybody on my block here probably has, a toolbox full of all types of tools that we've just duplicated, and we all use them once in a great while, where if we had one centrally located toolbox that's easily accessible to all the members of the village, then we won't have to duplicate all these tools. And what I'm actually going to put on as the most important aspect of this community center is a water storage. It's going to be special, innovative, something I've just recently thought up. Actually, I recently thought it up with this design for this course that I'm participating in. So this is the building. These are the inner walls, and I'm going to kind of draw it in a square fashion. And that's the inner wall. The inner walls are thin. Okay. Then we're going to have the outer walls, and the outer walls are going to be made of tightly packed straw bales. It's a straw bale community center. Of course, you got to do your cob thing and leave room for windows if you so desire. I don't want the windows in this building because it's not going to be a place you're living. It's going to be a place for efficiency. And these bales are going to be lengthwise so that there's more depth to the wall of the building. It's going to take a lot of straw bales, but once it's done, it'll be sitting there for a long time. Okay, and maybe this roof has some type of a slope to it. Let's use black. I'm going to have some structure inside, and there's going to be a little bit of a slope to it. I'm going to come down, and this is going to be all insulation in here. Okay. Now, if I had blue, I'd use blue next. So I guess I'm going to have to use green. This part of the walls, and we're actually going to want to sink this into the soil or into the ground. It's going to be for water storage. It's rainwater. So any water that falls on the roof is going to go into these tanks. It's going to be a stacking of functions for the water being in the community center. Let's talk about a couple of them off the top of my mind, not having prepared for this. One is obviously watering the gardens. Okay, since it's downslope, it's going to be gravity. You may have to do a little pumping at the bottom of the tanks if we get that low. We don't want to get that low. We want to oversupply. We're going to have an oversupply of water in this building for the surrounding gardens. So, but if we have to, we can use a hand pump to get the rest of the water out if it's not below the level of the bottom of the tank. Okay. So depends on how far out we have the garden. So that's, as we work this design, maybe we can just have our thing on the bottom, because I think we can make this work right off the top, right? So we're going to be watering our gardens. Water is the best medium to store heat and cooling. So this can go across climate lines. It can serve as a heat storage for cold climates and a cooling storage for hot arid climates. Any kind of hot climate, right? Not just arid ones. Okay, what else can we think about that water? We can use it for washing clothes. We can have a filtration system for one of the tanks for potable water. Okay, what else can I think of? Well, I can't think of anything else, so let's go on. I gotta keep moving. Alright, that's the outward face of the building. Let's look down on this building so we can see how I partition out the tanks. So right here, we're gonna have our walls. Get that closer. Okay, those are our 4 walls, our 4 tanks. Okay. You can design them to be however thick you want. You can make them out of that special cement that make, or I've seen on YouTube some indigenous people out there in Southeast Asia, they make this stuff out of clay. So they got some type of a clay mix they're using to make their tank. So in a low budget but a high labor situation, you can be making this out of clay and not have a lot of money involved in this. Same thing with the straw, it costs some land and some time. It's going to take a couple seasons or a season to get the straw bales together if you're growing them for yourself. But otherwise, you can buy them on the market rather cheaply. They're a lot less expensive building material than what you normally will find at a big box store here in the United States. Okay, so that's our 4 walls. At these junction points are going to be our entrances, so that people on one side of the community center don't have to walk all the way around to get into the entrance. Okay, and we're going to have a double entrance system. In the heat of the summer, we can be closing both of those doors off to preserve the coolness inside, or vice versa in the cold climate situation. So that's a top view of this building with the tanks. Move along, move along. All right, we're thinking about our water here, so let's make the surrounding area around it as for community service. Maybe a playground for children, or maybe it's a lounging area. Can be doubled as a working area. cleaning vegetables and whatnot. Okay, that's an empty space around the building, all the way around. Other than trees, we're going to want to have trees. And let's think about the sun quickly. Let's do the solar aspect. This is the sun. As the earth faces towards the sun in the east. This is the morning. West. Evening. Very important that we understand this, because what we're attempting to do in permaculture design is create scenarios that produce more energy than what they consume. Now that is a difficult proposition in a lot of areas, so we can rephrase that, kind of compromise a little bit by saying use as little energy as possible when you're not in surplus, when you're in the negative. This is the sun's path. I suppose that coffee cup's in the way now. Is that even in there? Might not be in there. Let's bring this down a little bit. So now I'm going to be cut off a teeny bit. So I'm glad I looked. I don't know if that's even dark enough. It looks kind of can see it. Let's go back to darken it up just a teeny bit. Oh, that's even better. Oh yeah. Now I'm going to be really dark my face, but that's okay. The light is changing. If I go to auto, then it's really, well, that's not too bad. Let's stay on auto for a while, see what happens. My face is going to be really dark, but that's what I have to deal with. Sun's path. Okay, it's actually the earth rotating. It's not the sun's path, but we're going to call it the sun's path because that's the way we think of it. So, thinking about the solar aspect of this, in the morning, we want no shade on the building. No shade. You see that? Okay, so we're not going to have any trees or bushes or anything on the east side of the building. And this, by the way, is going to be in the northern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere, this is all in reverse. I don't think about the southern hemisphere much. There's not a lot of people living there. Oh yeah, there's some important people there, just not as many. So non-shade, but in the west, we definitely need to have trees. As the sun faces as the earth faces the sun, there's a lag time. In the morning, it's just about drying out the building. It's all we want to do is dry out the building. But and we get around the mid-morning area, then it begins to heat up. And then we want to start in an arid, warm climate. We want to start shading seriously. In a cold climate, we may wait until 2 o'clock in the afternoon to start shading. So it all depends on your climate, and your geography also has something to do with it, because at higher elevations you've got more direct sunlight coming right at you, especially at the equator. So you have to think about the solar aspect for the placement of trees on your community, and as well as your living houses. And as a community center, nobody's sleeping here or living here. It's just a community center. Okay, so in the morning we have non-shaded scenario, but in the west we definitely want to have trees that overhang. And we want to layer amount of trees. We want to have some bushes in around here. You want a multi-story of leaves. Maybe some perennials on the ground to preserve moisture in the ground. Rhubarb, I found, has these very large leaves, and they grow very well in the shade. So maybe there's rhubarb under here. Any type of plant that has very large leaves has obviously had their genesis in the shade. So you plant those, use perennials in the shade underneath this food forest. In an arid climate, you're going to begin to encroach onto the south of the building. Maybe not quite as shaded as the west, but having some shade. Honey locust casts this really nice dampened shade. There's little bits of sun that come through it, and the leaves are very small, and the wind kind of catches them, and somehow it swirls around the tree a little bit. I really like honey locust a lot for shading buildings. So you got the trees in here, and on the south side, in every climate, you want to have trellis. I'm familiar with this in the cold climate since I live in one. And grapevines, also kiwi vines. These are trellised grapevines. So we got leaves on all these. That whole thing is filled with leaves in the summer. So in the summertime, of course the sun is almost directly overhead, so you can also be using an overhang to get the sun off of the southern exposed wall. In a cold climate, it's going to want to be glass, so sun gets in the wintertime. In the hot arid, you know, maybe you're not going to have glass on the south. You're just going to be just total building. The only light that comes in is the entrances, which can be glass, and also there are these domed lights that you can place onto the roof, and they have a tube that comes through the roof and spread out the light underneath the tube. You can put those in the buildings that don't have a lot of glass in them. It's all about having the most efficient building, using know-how as possible. So you got these grapevines, and to say something quick about that, in a cold climate, you know, they lose their leaves. At the first frost, they begin to die off and drop off, and that's at the time when, especially in the northern climate here, and where I'm at 44 N, and the sun is now, or the earth is now tilting away from the sun, so now the sun is able to go underneath the overhang and come into my glass and heat inside the building. And that building can have maybe a stone floor, and those stones will heat up by having that sunlight shining on it. That might be all it takes to get through a winter if you have these walls full of water holding the heat in. I don't know, this is just a design idea. I don't know if I'll ever try it, but I think it's a pretty interesting idea. Alright, because Nicholas Bertner spent some time on solar domestic water heaters, and I used to own a business that installed them. Now, I'm not an educated person where I went through a school system to figure out all these particulars, but I seem to have been pretty good at designing the mainframe part of these devices, and have well over 100 of them installed and still operating today. That was 12 years ago that we did that. Fell on hard times. I burned out, and it's no longer in existence, but the machines are still there. So we have our water tank, and we want to have a feed line from the bottom, and here we have our collectors. They're generally a long, narrow box. Inside the box are tubes that maybe serpentine back and forth. And in a passive system, I don't recommend any heat exchangers. It takes a lot of length for the heat to go into the water in a passive system, and in the passive system, the water is just not circulating fast enough. You need to have a pump. Now, if you put in a pump and maybe run that off of solar electric, or there may be some other ways of circulating that water. But that pump, you know, DC pump, there are DC pumps that'll modulate along with the sun shining on the solar panel. Then you can have the heat exchanger, and the heat exchanger inside is basically just another set of tubes like this. Okay, and this is our feed line, and then this is the return line. So this is the way the water's flowing. And then you're going to have a pump on here. You want to have the pump on the draw, because then you're not pushing water, you're drawing it through the collectors. And then it has a little solar panel up here with wires going to it that's going to run the pump. Now, if it's passive, then we don't want to have a heat exchanger. We want to draw that water directly. You're just not going to have enough power, siphoning power, to get that to circulate fast enough to impart the heat into that tank as necessary. So I guess we're really getting dark here now, aren't we? But we can see this, can't we? I guess we're getting a little shading issues there, but it looks okay. Alright. Now, in a cold climate, we're not going to be able to use the system in winter because the water will freeze unless you're very judicious with it. Very carefully monitoring it and only running it during, sunny days, and then draining it. In the case of one with a heat exchanger, then you use a product called glycol. It's a mixture in with the fluid that goes around into the heat exchanger. Then there's also what's called the drain back system. There's another tank involved. And that tank is right on the return line, or it could be, the return line coming down, or it could be on the other side. And there's a pump, and there's a heat controller, and it monitors the heat out here on the panel. When it gets to be warm enough, the pump turns on, and the pump circulates the fluid through the system. When it detects the heat dropping in the solar collector, it shuts off, and then all the fluid drops into the tank, which actually would have to be located on the inside of the building. I'm just going on the fly here. So then all that fluid that circulates through the collectors is no longer outside at night. So that would be the drain back tank, to call it. Again, if you want to do it all, this drain back tank situation is the very best, but it requires the most equipment, and it requires a power source for the pumps. Okay, so drain back tank. Secondly, you can be using a system that has a solar electric and a DC pump, and then I would recommend you actually covering this panel when the water begins to overheat in the tanks, or before the water overheats in the tanks. And if you want to do a passive system, then no heat exchanger, and just heat the water directly. So that is my take on solar domestic water heating. Alright, moving along, we got our community. Remember, we have our community area. And now we're going to have our gardens. So this area are the gardens. And see, now I've got this spigot at the lowest end of the tank. So that kind of works right there. We can be watering our gardens from our water tanks in the community building. Okay, now let's look at a down view on this. So this is let's call it zone 1, maybe even zone 0, because this is the building. And then surrounding is the community area. Alright, now we're into the gardens. This is zone 2. And we're going to partition these into segments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Well, I like 13 because 13 is a summation series number. So these are individual gardens for the housing of the families or the individuals surrounding the gardens. And each one of these lines can represent a main path, and each one of these gardens representing a house. And maybe I'm doing the angle wrong. We want to angle to the sun. Haha. the south part of it to the sun. Each of these houses divide the houses up. This is as suggested by Bill Mollison, but my house is actually the same thing. Cold climate, we want that southern exposure, so the lengthwise of the rectangle is facing the sun. And then you kind of divide the house in half, and on this side are the kitchen and living room areas. And then in the back are the bedrooms. At night you're sleeping, you don't need to have that heat. You're probably under covers. During the day we can get that heat into the areas that we're going to be spending most of our time in. Plus there are other benefits, but we got to move along. Again, all these houses are facing the sun. South end is facing the sun. Of course, we can get a garage in there or some other buildings. Surrounding the house, we can have little bushes and trees similar to the community garden and the same solar aspect. And actually, all of these trees and bushes and stuff that are being used are also crop trees. So we're also gaining a food source. Okay, next area. These are going to have low perennials. And buildings for animals. Okay. Interspersed the perennials and the animal buildings together. Again, the animal buildings can have the same trees and bushes at the same solar aspect as the community center and the houses. That's the central theme of this village on the knob. Next one. I'm going to call this our forest garden circle. Okay, and here we're going to be having a swale. Let's draw the swale in purple. This entire knob area here is going to be a swale. Notice it's below the house, and now we're not worried about soaking water in and flooding any basements. And I could have a pretty good talk just on how we design the basements of these houses, but we have to move along. So that's a big, huge swale. And you know, we got to have a couple spillways. A normal spillway for normal 100-year events, and then we want a big emergency swale someplace, maybe a couple of them, where the swale mount is just a little lower. And we're going to be directing our water away from the area if we get just inundated with like 24 inches of water in 24 hours, which has happened in the United States. One of them was down in Florida. Of course, if we talk about hurricane in Houston a couple years ago, then that blows that out too. But from now on, every one of these lines should be a swale. They're tree planting systems. And because we're got a forest garden here now below the first swale, we can have all types of trees in here. And actually, because it's a forest garden, it's going to be more of an organized situation. You might have little lines of orchards in here. Again, we're going to be thinking about the solar aspect. Or maybe some bushes are better off being like this. That's part of the discovery process. But there's going to be lines and paths throughout here, and they're all going to be with trees. Maybe the bigger trees are on the north side. And because I didn't draw lines here along with the houses, this is all community area now. So we have our taller trees to the north side and to the west side. providing more shade from the west sun. And because we don't need to have a lot of sun behind the north end coming towards the community center, and then we're going to have smaller, lower trees and bushes to the east and to the south. Again, this is a cold climate. It'll be different in an arid, hot, or even a tropical hot climate. Alright, so that's our forest garden. Next zone out. I think we should break this up. Oh, you know, I forgot. This is a swale. And I'm thinking about this as we go here. I'm thinking that this area can be for grazing, farm animals. So these swales can come out into the the spillways can come out into these grazing areas, and we can have little areas that'll filtrate the water through the system. All of these. That would be interesting. So any surplus of water, we can get it to spread if we can figure out ways with little channels or little depressions or just little slight things. As the water comes out of the spillway, it flows into the whole grazing area. That would be huge. And then each one of these spillways can be a pathway for the buildings for the farm animals. So at those spillways can be the buildings for the farm animals. Again, this is a community area. We don't want a building for every house. So a couple of main buildings at these spillways, and the spillways becomes the pathways into the grazing area. And this gets the farm animals closer to the people for protection at night, and then during the day they can get away from the people and do their grazing outside the circle. Next circle. This is the food forest. Alright, the only thing consistent about this food forest is it's mixed species. There's no pattern. And the other aspect of this is no matching species next to one another. So you have one species and it's totally surrounded by species that it isn't associated with, isn't related to. That's the food forest. And you can have little openings in there where there's lower growing trees and taller growing trees, but you still want to do the same. Tilted towards the larger, taller trees to both the north and the west, and smaller, lower trees to the east and the south. And finally, our last circle, which doesn't even need to be a circle, it can be just everything. The rest of this board, this is just wildness. This is where we may be spending a little bit of our time foraging and hunting, fishing. Little lakes or streams nearby. And maybe we do a little tweaking where we know there's a tree that's not productive, maybe do a little hinge cutting, allowing for, tethered grazing off of those hinge cut trees. Trees that hinge cut well up here are ash trees. You hinge cut them, and basically what you're doing is you take that tree, you got the butt of the tree growing into the surface, and then you cut the tree about 3/4 of the way with a chainsaw, and then you lay it down. So this is the tree here. Let's finish this here. So you've cut that tree right here. It's whole together here. It's held together right here. You got a little bend here, and then this is the tree. What happens is these leaves eventually die off, and I've already done it where I cut this right off, and then this thing grows all kinds of branches along this horizontal branch, and they'll actually come out and grow kind of weird. But if you do this low to the ground, like 12 inches from the ground, now it's accessible to be eaten by your goats and other grazing animals. So you might have in this wilderness area, maybe even in the food forest and in the grazing area, you can have a little bit of this, increasing amounts as you go out. Or you've hinge cut the non-productive trees, and they'll actually spring out new branches like they were coppiced here. All these will have leaves on it, and the goats will eat everything, the stems and all. Some of these trees will live quite a long time doing that. Some of them are going to die off right away. Well, then you can use them as firewood. And you're going to be judicious with this. You're not going to do it all. But when you do this, you actually want to take that opportunity, the sunlight coming down to the ground, is to plant some productive trees here. Little saplings. Then as they grow up and begin to shade this, it's going to kill it off, but then you can hinge cut something else. I actually hinge cut black walnut in the backyard. Oh, is it springing out all kinds of shoots there. And I know deer eat them, so I don't see why goats wouldn't. So that's another idea I can add to this. And I don't know if we got our 20 minutes in or not. But there's a lot of ways that you can modify from this. I mean, the knob isn't perfect, and now there's maybe more houses on one side than the other, or maybe the house is a little farther away than others. I mean, there's all kinds of differences. And just because I divided up the gardens into every house doesn't mean that each person living in each of these houses is going to tend to garden. Some of these people may really love to deal with animals, so they're spending a lot of time on animals, and there's some people that are going to love gardens, and they're going to spend more time in these gardens. But to have the arrangement of fairness, we're going to do the kitchen gardens into each house. Not that I necessarily like the word fair, because everybody's different, everybody wants different things, and it's hard to divide this up so it's fair. So, like some of these permaculture people have replaced the third ethic in the manual with fair share, but that's a political term, and it's actually redundant because we already have people care in it. So the fair share part of this I don't like, but let's have the arrangement like it is fair. I can agree with that much, but that doesn't mean that the people are going to fairly share in all aspects of this work. We're going to go, to be the most efficient, we want to go towards people's strengths and not force them into their weaknesses. So, I guess that's it. Let's see how good of a picture we're getting. I don't know if this is 20 minutes or not, but this is it. Oh, I'm running out of battery too. So we'll kind of get a little more close up. I'll take a picture here. That is the design called The Village on the Knob. Alright, thanks for watching.